Welcome to the most important week of the year for the podcast industry. Welcome to Podcast Movement 2025.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for attending. It's really great to see you guys. My name is Scot Herd, and I have been in media sales for 30 years. It's a long time. And I have gone from seeing untargeted mass media to today's world of very targeted directional media. And I'm up here today with my colleague Anthony Savelli, and I'll throw it to him to introduce himself.
Thank you, Scott. It's so great to be here. Thanks, everybody, for sitting down with us today. My name is Anthony Savelli. I'm an EVP of sales at Libsyn. My main focus is direct ad sales, like host-read advertising. I'm honored to be on stage with Scott. He's a veteran in the industry, and he's got experience selling several different mass media channels, television, radio, digital, probably some newspaper and magazine going way back there a little bit. So that's really cool. I had some experiences working in the marketplace business when I first started in podcasting about 8-9 years ago, working for a company called Cast Plus. I then worked in the rep firm space, a company called Podcast Ad Reps. And for the last 3.5 years, I've now been working with Libsyn, with Scott. We're a hosting platform, and we sell host-read ads as well. So you're going to have a unique mix of perspectives here. You've got kind of a new podcast media perspective from me and an absolute veteran in Scott. So that's exciting. This journey we're talking about, it spans decades, from broad strokes, radio and TV, to the hyper-targeted, personalized ads you hear on podcasts today. So that's a lot about what we're going to be discussing. And we're going to also shout out a few ways that Libsyn's getting involved in helping brands partner with super engaging podcasts. So that said, I'll pass it back to Scott to get us kicked off.
Awesome. Thanks, Anthony. Appreciate that. So, there was a huge shift years and years ago. And just for a big picture comparison, back in the 1960s, and I wasn't selling yet. I was close to it, but I wasn't selling yet. You could run 3 prime-time television ads across the networks, ABC, NBC, and CBS, and reach 80% of the United States, 80% of the households. To do that in today's world, you would need hundreds of ad placements across many different channels because the reach just is not what it was years and years ago. So with that, radio was the first mass medium. We had jingles, we had voiceovers, we had storytellers. Years ago, advertisers would sponsor a show. An example is Texaco Star Theater. And they would do it on AM radio, and the reach was phenomenal. It was just huge. And then came television. Television was the big visual storyteller. Massive reach. Reached everywhere from coast to coast. And it brought us really into the Mad Men era. Madison Avenue, big agencies dumping lots of money for their advertisers into television. But a lot of that was wasted money. And the reason it was wasted, they weren't able to pinpoint and target exactly who their consumer was. Today, when advertising agencies or brands place their media, their brands need relevance, and most importantly, they need results. ROI is much more closely monitored today than it was years ago. And with mass media, like with anything, there's always problems and challenges. And one of them is finances. Today, in today's world, to buy a Super Bowl ad, it costs $7 million. I mean, could you imagine in podcasting if we had a $7 million order? And this $7 million is for a 30-second ad. That's it, one ad. Then on top of that, you have the cost of producing the commercial, which in television is very expensive. And with mass media, there's a lack of targeting. Everyone sees the same commercial, no matter what, regardless of the relevance. We and you relied on Nielsen and phone surveys for our measurement. Very unscientific. In today's world, especially in podcasting, you have a pixel, you know exactly how many impressions you reach. It was like marketing with a blindfold on. And that's a tough way to market. Today, they're marketing with a microscope. They're getting right down to the level to the consumer that they need. Audiences began to scatter. especially when cable TV came about. People had many more choices than the networks. They could see monster truck shows on ESPN, History Channel, Weather Channel, and finally, it was more than just the big three out there. But, when the internet came, it just shattered the model of mass media. Social media, apps, streaming. It gives the consumer control over what, when, and how they consume content. So the consumer is now in control of all of that. That made it harder for advertisers. You just couldn't get the precision and the personalization in mass media like you can in digital. Today's consumers expect content and ads tailored directly to them. And that's really the world that we're living in. With that, I'll throw it back to Anthony.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. And I want to highlight that this shift isn't just about tech. It's about a shift in the attention and trust of consumers these days. Listeners, podcast fans, or really just any individual, they have so many options today. They can tune into hyper niche shows that are about exactly what they want to listen to rather than turning on the FM radio and kind of being left with a short list of options to tune into. So enter podcasting. Podcasting's emerged as one of the most powerful, intimate forms of media available to advertisers today, with hyper niche audiences. At Libsyn, we host over 75,000 podcasts. We see it all. We've seen shows about fantasy football, parenthood. We see true crime, of course. I've seen some hyper niche audiences like solar power podcasts. Think about if you're a product in the solar space, and you're able to leverage a solar energy targeted podcast. No regular Joe is tuning into that show. It's going to be people that are involved in the industry that are probably interested in the products you're marketing. So it's that much more valuable as a channel. I also want to highlight podcasting grabs listeners' attention and it really holds it. We're not talking about 15 minutes of attention. We're talking 30 minutes, 60 minutes. A lot of interview podcasts these days run north of 3 hours long. So there aren't a lot of other mediums that can actually grab listeners' attention and hold it for that kind of duration. So I also want to highlight a few of our own Libsyn shows, that kind of highlight the niche aspect of podcasting in general. Starting off, 10% Happier with Dan Harris, one of our biggest podcast partners for Host Red Partnerships. Dan Harris is a longtime ABC reporter. Many of you might know Dan. You would think if he started a podcast, it would probably be about the news, politics, current events, trending topics. Not really, no. Actually, Dan, as a person, he had a panic attack on the air in 2004. He ended up authoring a book called 10% Happier. And Dan's podcast is about his book. It's about making yourself 10% happier, incrementally, your day-to-day life. So it's a health and wellness, mental health show. It's pretty niche, with a host like Dan, who's actually got some stardom out there. He's out here talking about happiness and improving your life. So that's pretty neat. Another one of our shows that highlights that kind of niche factor is Small Town Murder. We recently onboarded this network, Shut Up and Give Me Murder. Their large, famous show is Small Town Murder. You would think it's a true crime show, right? Like it's about murder. No, it's really about, it's a show hosted by two comedians, stand-up comedians. If you listen to the show, when you think true crime, you're thinking serious tones, dark topics. This show is friggin' hilarious, okay? It's a funny show. They kind of take a lighthearted and comedic approach to true crime and small town energies. So, these podcasts aren't really about any one specific topic. They're very niche in nature, and that's kind of the power that advertisers are seeing as they enter and expand their messaging on the podcast channel. So I'll pass it back over to Scott to talk a bit more about the targeting power of podcasting.
Thanks, Anthony. Yeah, this is really where podcasting shines, how deeply you can target in the podcast for an advertiser. There are two different kinds of ad formats. There's a baked-in format, which is an ad that stays in the show forever. There's also a dynamically inserted ad format that you can take in and out of the show once you reach the impression level that you bought. But they can podcasts can target by topic, location, time of day, device, gender, whatever you would like. I mean, it's a level of precision that radio and TV do not have. And because of this targetability, advertisers get tremendous return on their investment. That's why so many direct-to-consumer advertisers come into this medium, because it delivers great results. And they use tools like promo codes, vanity URLs, pixel attribution. And with the pixel attribution, advertisers can track conversions and ROI much more accurately than they can in mass media. You know, advertisers are no longer fishing in the ocean. Now they're fishing in a stock pond. And, you know, you get a stock pond, you get a whole lot better chance of great results than you do in a wide body of water or a wide body of anything, for that matter. We have a show called, two shows, Burner Phone and The Vial Files. And these two shows consistently outperform the marketplace in results when their message matches the moment. So that's really a great topic, message matching the moment. You know, podcasts, because they're so regular, they're able to match whatever's going on in the world, which is really pretty cool. So we have a couple of case studies we'd love to talk to you about. One I have is a mid-sized athletic wear brand shifted part of their TV budget, in a small part, to podcast focusing on health and fitness. They used dynamic ads with regional targeting, and they saw a 4-to-1 return on their ad spend. Tremendous, 4-to-1. And also, their website traffic went up 70%. The power of targeting, the power of podcasting. And with that, I'll throw it back over to Anthony for a couple of more case studies.
You sure you don't want to keep talking about fishing a little bit, Scott?
I'd like to talk about fishing, hunting. You know, I'd like to hunt in the stocked forest.
So let's talk about a case study that's on the total opposite end of the spectrum. You know, we worked with a luxury jewelry brand. They tried podcasting for the first time, but this brand didn't tailor their messaging and they didn't tailor their placement of the ads. What they did is they ran generic ads on comedy and gambling podcasts, completely mismatched to their high-end market. The result, very poor engagement, negligible lift in brand awareness, and it really highlights the importance of aligning your messaging with the right audience. Precision targeting, it only works when paired with the right creative context. So you've got a major success in the example Scott brought up with this luxury jewelry brand, not so much. I got a third example. You know, we work with a direct-to-consumer sleep supplement. They use podcasts as their main launch. They partnered on wellness and parenting podcasts. They use unique promo codes. They rotated creative based on listener feedback. This brand saw steady growth. They had a 5% conversion rate, and they built a loyal customer base within 6 months of launch. So all of this really highlights the importance of truly, you know, with podcasting, putting your hands on the campaign, getting involved and working to make it work, because it's not an automatic win if you use podcasting as a channel. So let's compare. When working with mass media, it offers broad reach. However, it's generally higher costs, and there's limited tracking opportunities with the mass media option. Podcasting offers niche audiences, precision targeting, cost efficiency, higher levels of engagement, but you need to put your hands on the campaign. You know, it requires a lot more thoughtful placement in the podcast channel. So both of these channels have a place. Brands looking for measurable results, and loyal audiences, podcasting might be the best solution for you. So looking forward from here, you know, podcast ad revenue is going to surpass $5 billion in the next few years, just the next few years. So this isn't just a trend, you know, it's a movement. Podcasting, it's a podcast movement, right? Just kidding. No, it really is though. But, you know, with advancement in the tech space, with AI, with smart speakers, attribution, DAI and programmatic, hosting platform tech advancing, you know, podcasting is going to continue to become more interactive and more valuable to brands as time moves on. And that $5 billion figure, it probably seems pretty large, but in 2023, digital spend was $225 billion. It's crazy. TV, $63 billion. CTV, $25 billion. Radio was $11 billion. So we're working our way towards a $5 billion run rate. You know, we're just at the beginning days of podcasting and podcast advertising. So we're going to see that number and that piece of the pie continue to grow and expand as brands take notice of that niche, hyper-targeted approach that we have to offer in the podcast space. So with that said, I'll pass it back to Scott to wrap us up today.
Excellent. Thank you, Anthony. So a few takeaways. What have we learned? Well, we certainly know that mass media laid the foundation for modern advertising. We know that audiences have fragmented expectations from the consumers have changed. And we also know that podcast advertising's unique mix of authenticity, targeting, and measurability leads to much greater results and return on investment for brands. The future of advertising is not about shouting to everyone. It is about speaking directly to the right person, and with podcasting, that connection is not only possible, it's powerful and delivers great results. Thank you so much for listening. Really appreciate you being here. We'd love to hear some of your questions or of any experiences you've had with either mass media or podcasting. So who of you out there would like to open it up for us?
Don't ask all at once.
Tacoma? Anybody? Greg? All right, Eric in the front row.
What have you seen has been the most successful genre of podcasting in terms of advertising getting the most results?
You know, it really depends on the brand and the products being marketed. But if we're talking in general terms right now, what are we seeing at Libsyn as being very a winning category? Pop culture, reality TV, news and politics is super hot right now, you know, especially it being an election year. And the tech space hasn't cooled off at all. Always going to shout out tech. So those are just a few, though. You can win in any category. You know, we have a lot of very successful comedy partners, true crime, a lot of the usual. So thank you. Thank you for asking.
Who's next? Anybody?
Has anybody here sold or bought mass media in the past before? I'm just curious. All right. Very cool. What channel did you sell?
I used to buy TV and radio and out of home too.
Cool.
Long time ago.
Are there any key differences between like podcasting? I know Amber works on our team actually selling podcast ads. What are some couple differences you've noticed between TV and podcasting?
The expense, I think Scott mentioned it briefly, was the expense of producing a television commercial and how long it takes. I've been on several sets where we've done commercial shoots, and it's exhausting and expensive, and it just takes a long time, and there's editing. So being able to create a podcast campaign is much quicker and easier and less expensive, and you can pivot very quickly, whereas TV, you've got maybe a couple ads, 3 ads if you've got the budget, and with podcasting you can switch out copy points and like that. Yeah, exactly.
Very cool. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else, or should we wrap it up?
2 minutes, 2.5 minutes.
We have 2.5 minutes left. We must have explained it all pretty well. No question. All right, Matthew.
Thank you. What would you say is an undervalued aspect of podcast advertising? Maybe something that sets it further apart that maybe we're not highlighting enough.
That's a great question. That'll certainly help us in sales at Libsyn, no question. I think something that is not talked about enough is something that Anthony brought up, and it's the time that a consumer spends with a show. So in radio, we used to call that time spent listening. Higher the TSL, generally higher the return for the advertiser. So in podcasting, I don't think we highlight that nearly as much as we should. We certainly highlight targetability, we highlight efficiencies, we highlight creative, doesn't cost a lot, authenticity, etc. But a lot of advertisers are really into this TSL, or maybe we call it TSP, time spent podcasting. But I think that's something that really needs to be illustrated more than it is.
Just to add on, I think it's pretty cool that with podcasting, you can also consume the channel when you're actively doing other things, mowing the lawn, in the gym, when your brain is working. I think that's kind of an undervalued aspect of it as well. It makes the content more tangible, I guess is the way I see it. I also think that opportunities for added value for advertisers are kind of under leveraged by brands. I don't want to speak on behalf of my whole team, but it's almost, if you're a buyer, if you ask for it, a lot of the time we'll do our best to get it to you. So we have on-demand inventory. There's catalogs of impressions that are happening in live time. There's always inventory. So, yeah, added value. I think we're at time. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks,
really
everyone.
Appreciate your attendance.
Have a great show.